Welcome to Pirate Living Podcast. We are your hosts, Kristen and Karan. On this podcast, we are highlighting ordinary people living extraordinary lives. These are pirates who take small, bold actions daily to create social change. Pirate life is all about rebelling and breaking the rules for good. Creating lasting social change starts by first breaking our inner rules. After all, the hardest rules to break are your own. Pirates we highlight have dedicated themselves to creating good trouble.
Today on our podcast, we're talking to Taryn Porter. Taryn has been a social worker for the past 21 years and having received her master's in social work from the University of Toronto in 2019. She's currently working in the counseling office for a local university, and prior to that has worked with families in crisis as well as 2 different domestic violence shelters here in Vancouver. Taryn is also passionate about pottery after getting her start in 2007. She works with a collective of artists and uses pottery as a transformative experience. Taryn also happens to be one of the most beautiful souls I have the pleasure of knowing.
Oh my gosh.
Taryn, you have been in the thick of things with social work for 21 years. I would love for you to tell us the tale of what drew you to a life dedicated to helping others in crisis.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what a good big question to start off with. So I think that my early educational experience definitely was what brought me to social work, because I had a learning disability when I was in school. And so I kind of got a frontline view of a lot of interesting things. So I was placed in, this is when I was very young, I was placed in a class with all, if you can believe it, all the high-risk kids. And there were also definitely some students who had some disabilities for sure. But the way things happened back in the 80s in school, the school system, is that anyone who didn't quite fit the typical mold got thrown into that kind of classroom in Sherwood Park in Alberta in the 80s. And so I experienced personal bullying, but then I also saw a lot of high-risk kids. I had people disclosing some of their personal experiences with their dad abusing them physically. And so I just got caught in real quick. It was kind of a hard and fast lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when I was able to integrate back into a regular classroom, because what they realized it was that I was just a different kind of a learning style. So once the system was able to adapt to me and I was able to adapt to the system, I went back into the regular classroom and all was good. But those experiences definitely impacted me for a long time. Definitely through my first bout of university, I kind of was hanging on with this, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough mentality. And it really took a long time to get through that. So when I work with people who have been systemized, who have been bullied, who have had some struggles, I have a little bit of empathy and understanding of what they might have gone through.
Mm-hmm.
That's the short answer.
Yeah, definitely. I know that the hard times that we go through, they're often the gift that that spurns our reason in life, right? What we get passionate about. And it's interesting that you were so impacted at a young age by people's story and in turn the desire to help them. So you said the first time through university, did you go into social work right away, or did you try something else? You knew right away?
I knew right away. I've known since like junior high.
Wow.
I was very focused, but I've definitely done some topsies and turvies within my career. But I got my diploma in social work at Grant MacEwan for 2000. So I graduated in 2000. And back then that was the best sort of diploma program around. And I even got grandfathered into the Association of Social Work with a diploma, where now you need a social work degree before you can get in. But it was that time where people had a lot of informal education, had diplomas, and it made a lot of sense. But now things have changed and become a lot more standardized. So I was lucky. I was lucky to be a part of that. And so so what happened after I got my diploma, I thought, thought, I was like 20 something, so young,
Mm-hmm.
so green. And so I was saying to myself, I need to get out there. And I was also in the background, I was thinking, I'm not smart enough to do university. That was like an unfortunate thought that I had been working through. So I was like, oh, I just need to get out there. And so what did I pick? The most challenging thing. I worked with child welfare. And so I worked in conjunction with child welfare the first 4 years, working with high-risk families. And then I leaped into child welfare and actually became a child welfare worker.
Yeah.
It's a different lingo, but just for child and youth services, because child welfare definitely has a lot of, big connotations, but essentially that's what I did. And so I did that till about 2008. So 2000 to 2008, I did both of those roles. So first working with the families, and then more as the social worker.
Yeah, it's interesting that it was, directly connected to the experience that you had as a youth, that you went, not only did you choose social work, but you chose to work with the youth that had impacted you from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm actually curious about something you said about, because, Kristen and I, we're both coaches in the language and story game. And that's a big part of what we do. You mentioned the voice in your head that you weren't good enough. And I imagine that really stems from the story that you were told as a youth, being in like the special class rather than with everybody else. How did you go about changing that story?
I just decided to hardcore it. I was going to show the world. I think I just needed a lot of reinforcement and kindness, and I really got it. Like, I've been very lucky where I've gained a lot of support. And I think that's where my natural of wanting to support people comes from, is because, like, well, I received the support. Why would I not want to give anyone who needs to support them that gift back to them? So I think I just had to live life and go through the motions and, take those compliments and, take my successes as they came. And then, I got a master's, and, there was a little part of me that said, I'm going to fucking do it. Sorry for the swear.
You can swear. You can swear.
Okay.
This is a pirate podcast. You can swear. Don't worry.
Yeah. And so I think that, and then, also it was really cool in between. So I was in Vancouver and went to Emily Carr, which was so fantastic. And so even though I was still kind of working in a domestic violence shelter, I was still able to do my artwork. And that's where I kind of really fell in love with pottery. And I realized how meditative and beautiful it was. But then getting that Bachelor of Fine Arts was really exciting for me. Yeah. And then it kind of just opened up all these avenues. And I stuck around in the domestic violence shelter system for a while. And then I realized I was just like stagnant, because it had been like something like 8 years. And I was so lucky that like one of my dear friends in Alberta said, oh, there's this master's program, and it's kind of out there. It's kind of out there master's program. It's actually called Masters in Social Work, Indigenous Trauma and Resilience. And it's ran by this very amazing unconventional psychologist named Jane Middleton Moss. And so what we had an elder with us, Rebecca Martel, and then Jane. And they ran this program, and their whole idea was to change the face of social work. And I believe that these women are doing it. And it's incredible. And, so they talked the first day, like the very first day, they talked about, how social work has some stuff to make up for. And, social work hasn't necessarily helped families. They have, in fact, contributed to some of the racialized issues that are happening, and people being very much hurt by the system. And so she talked about how, well, we need to make some changes in social work. And so she took things from a trauma-informed standpoint. And we had ceremony every morning that we were in Toronto, and I went 6 times over a 2-year period, 6 or 5. 5 or 6 times. And we were there for a full week, and every day we had ceremony, and it was absolutely beautiful. And so it's just this very strange experience, but there was something great about getting my master's. It really just kind of sunk those old feelings, and really just kind of let them go. I was able to let them go.
What are they doing to change the face of social work? So, and in that as well, like what have you been doing too?
I think that what were doing is they were incorporating, and this isn't necessarily new, like Toronto isn't the only people who are doing this. I know that there's similar programs here in BC, but what they're doing is integrating ceremony with practice. And so I became part of a community, and there was all these beautiful experiences that came from that. It wasn't a traditional classroom. When we were in ceremony, we sat in a circle. If there was issues, we talked about it in a circle, right? So it was pretty transformative. And I think that what they talked about, and one of the big key learning, is that with ceremony can become a lot of healing, but social work and a lot of psychological professions, for very good reason, are very hesitant to go there. Mm-hmm. But maybe there is some magic there and some beauty and some healing that, we all kind of know. Mm-hmm. But, we're not tapping into as much as we should. And so, but it's an ethical thing for sure. And I think that there's a lot of complexity. I'm like talking about a big thing here, but mm-hmm. It was a start to some thinking that I've had on the whole subject. And so in my current work in working with youth, I listen a lot and I try to help them decide what they want for themselves, because students, as you know, get a whole bunch of pressure from a whole lot of different places. And so if I can encourage them to really, what do you need to do? Mm-hmm. What do you want to do, as opposed to what everyone else wants you to do? And that's pretty important. And it kind of like my life journey is like, don't listen to all the experiences around the system that you had. What do you want? And it's the hardest thing. Like, no one teaches you to do that.
For sure. And that's super pirate. Like we talk about that a lot of often, about giving yourself permission to do the things that you want to do and to listen to what your I don't want to say mind, because often our mind tells us the wrong thing. But really, what is it that's in your soul, in your heart's work, what that you want to do? And it's really great that, first of all, you're integrating culture, right? Taking into account people's culture rather than trying to fix solutions in a very narrow box. And asking those tough questions for the youth that you're working with, so that they can get that start. I mean, I'm somewhat envious of you having known, and 15 or whatever, knowing what you wanted to do, versus like discovering it, in my 40s. And had I had someone asking me those tough questions when I was younger, could I have been on this path earlier in my life? And not that I regret anything in my life. I've had some wonderful experiences, but that's a really powerful thing to bring to the youth of the community.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is, that we could just I've kind of come up with this new phrase, holding the space. Mm-hmm. So no matter what they bring me, I'm failing classes or whatever, my parents have kicked me out. Mm-hmm. There's all these things that you can just kind of hold the space for them and listen. And mm-hmm. that's it seems so simple, and people don't realize that the power. Because I'm sure a lot of people can think back when they've been really listened to. How did that feel? Right. Mm-hmm. So really great. And that they felt heard. So what I love is this idea of holding the space. It's kind of one of my things, and I'm starting to actually put it now on my pottery. And I've had a lovely response from people. When people get it, they're just like, oh my God. I'm like, yeah, I know. Yeah. It's a really great idea. And it's hard to hold the space for people, because sometimes people don't bring nice things into that space. And so how do you make that separation and still still just trust that, who they are good, even though they're bringing that not such great thing into that space.
And that's huge too. Like, kids, they don't often feel heard and listened to, because so many adults in their lives are coming in and being like, this is what your life should look like. This is what you do. You listen to me, you follow these directions. So to have adults come in and be like, I'm listening, tell me anything, and judgment free, you can tell me things, like that's so huge for children, to be able to have an adult listen to them and really truly listen to them, instead of like, let me hear you and now I'm going to tell you what to do, but instead, like, okay, let me hear you, and then I'm going to help you figure out where to go from here.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny. Some students bring a lot to me, bring a lot and tell me far too much for my very limited role with them, because I'm not exactly doing counseling. I'm sort of the intake person, sort of first person they walk into, or first meeting. And so we don't want necessarily them from a trauma informed perspective. We don't want people to share their whole entire story, because it really might re-traumatize them. And so so much of my work is about breathing. If they find themselves dysregulated, like, okay, let's just take a minute and take a deep breath, and okay, we're going to get you connected, but maybe these are some things you can do now about your situation. Here are your options. That's a lot of the work that I do, and it's great. It's so fun.
It's great to hear you talk about breathing. That is such a huge portion of the work that we do with our story work and our language. And I know, Taryn, you've done some of my workshops, and the breath to just to down regulate and to calm ourselves down and to get out of that stress state is so powerful. And I'm really enjoying seeing a lot of the similarities in the work that you do and the way we coach. So that's beautiful.
Yes, I've often seen that there's a lot of crossover between the work that you do. And, one of these days, Karen, I'm going to do the 15 minutes of awesome with a student. I'm like just waiting, waiting for the right time, because I thought that was great.
That would make, oh my goodness, yeah, to do that with kids while they're doing their homework or something too, to be like, yes, every minute.
Yes.
Like, think of what they could come up with in that time.
Yeah. There's so much room for crossover, and I think it's important. So one of the things that I've really learned, going back to my art practice a little bit, being in school, being influenced by other people, but also seeing what they're doing, and then maybe not necessarily taking their ideas, but flowing off of each other, and our work can kind of be in conversation, but we can also be influenced by each other, which is really cool. And sometimes joint projects can happen, and it's just so exciting. There's so much good stuff that's happening out there, even in the midst of everything that's going on.
Totally.
Yeah.
We tend to focus on the negatives that are going on, but there's so much beauty and wonderful things that are happening. So I wanted to ask you, with the work that you're doing, what social rebellion are you looking to start, or have you started with your work?
Well, currently, I've been very interested in this idea of a death doula. And so, unfortunately, one of my friends committed suicide last January. And so that really got me thinking, and I kind of got introduced to this idea of what a death doula is. And so I've discovered this woman in the United States who is a death doula. Her name is Alua Arthur, and she is kind of changing the world a little bit. She has created this wonderful online course through her organization called Going with Grace. Like, what an amazing thing. And she's trying to help people learn how to become a death doula, so you can then help people to how to come to peace with the end of their lives. But then also there's a huge practical element to it. When people are like going through the process of getting their affairs in order, doing end of life plans and such, there's a lot of great practical work that goes into that. And it's very social work, but social work definitely has its own little role within those programs through the medical system, right? Social workers often help people do discharge planning, help with big applications, and that's also sort of in the end of life. And that does not sound like anything I want at all. That's system work, and I think it's really cool and good for those people who can do it. But I'm more interested in that, face-to-face practical stuff that in the advocacy sometimes that death doulas do. And so I'm hoping, cross fingers, to take her course in August, if not January. August or January. I'm already accepted, and so I'm super excited about that. Like, it's like pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, that seems like a really unique avenue to go down. What drew you to that?
I think it was honestly my friend's suicide. And
Yeah.
then what happened, I kind of felt really blue, understandably, for a couple
Mm-hmm.
months after. And then I got exposed to this wonderful influencer named Doughty, and she runs this YouTube series called Ask a Mortician. And she does all these wild, wonderful topics around death and around natural funerals and around natural burial and stuff like that. And it's kind of mind-blowing. It's like this whole thing that I think a lot of people avoid because it is such kind of a tough topic. But these women are joy-filled and they are changing the world. And it's pretty amazing. Some of the messaging is very similar. To staying true to yourself, because it's like we're so afraid of death, and we're so afraid of those final moments, but if we can make some plans around it, and if we can take some of the control back, because we can't control that we're going to die, but we can control what we do. So all very, very exciting stuff to be working potentially with someone on.
That's I mean, when you think about it too, if you can be at terms with death as something that happens, it opens up so much of life, because so many people are afraid of death and allowing that to control how they're living. So that's really great to be opening that conversation.
Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of education within it, and it's so impactful, and it really does hit to your core. And and so I think that it's pretty inspiring, and I'm not even sure if I'm going to do anything with it formally. I think I might. I really like the idea of education. And of course, I would want to get some kind of on-the-ground experience. Like, I have a lot of social work experience, but I don't have hospice experience. So probably want to do some hospice volunteer work. But like, I see that there's so much crossover, and that it is just so important. And so I kind of have to make friends with it on my own. So I'm kind of in that own process where, I need to make my own end of life plan. And I've kind of got some things kind of figured out. And I'm facing, my parents are aging. So I'm kind of facing those kind of life cycle. Everyone is facing them. And so I really want some of these tools for me, but also for, helping other people, and even last year it was an opportunity for me and an opportunity for my friend. Her mom was dying of cancer. And so I called her and said, hey, I'm thinking of being a death doula. I just want to chat about death with you. Are you cool with this? And she said yes. And so we had this great conversation. And then she called me when her mom passed away, and we had a nice chat. And I didn't know much about the whole process, but, she said that, our conversation was just so helpful, because then I was able to just say, hey, have you heard of mourning jewelry? Turns out she hadn't. So, and her mom was being cremated. So I think that there was these really, really cool moments, and that you can just help people. And that's just really exciting for me.
Yeah. A couple of things like came to mind when you were talking. First of all, death impacts every single one of us.
Yeah.
Right. We might not all experience crisis or sexual assault or violence. Hopefully we don't all experience that.
Yeah.
But we do all experience and are touched by death in some way or another during our life and our death. And so I think that is great, because we don't speak about it very often.
No.
We tend to shut down and keep our grief to ourselves. In my experience, anyways, dealing with it. And the thing that the other thing that really came to mind was your experience in your masterwork program with ceremony.
Yeah.
And how is there? I mean, I know that the whole concept of death doula is new to you and you're still coming into learning, but have you thought of ways to incorporate ceremony into what you might be doing as a death doula or learning as a death doula?
I think Alua is already into all that. And so I've watched a few of her videos, and, they're talking about chakras. I'm not sure I know enough about chakras to go much into it, but she was talking a little bit about that. What I think is important is that, we have the grieving person and we have the dying person. And is there something they could do together? So what my friend did, the friend whose mom was dying of cancer, what she did is that they planned her death outfit. And that was, like she said, like we cried, we laughed, and it was great. And so that's a small ceremony, right?
Yeah.
Is it as simple as taking flowers to someone's grave through a grief process? Yes, that is ceremony, because there's intention around it, and love and kindness. And so, and showing care. And so I think that there's definitely, you know, if someone's in their last moments, is there music playing? What music did they want playing? All those things. So when it comes, it's a plan. And it really helps the person who's grieving if there's a plan, right?
Yeah.
You can see that there's a lot of juiciness, because the person is just doing what their body is going to do. We can't change all those changes that are going to be happening in their body as the process, they slow down and die. And of course, we're talking about expected death. We're not talking about unexpected death. That's a whole other kettle of wax, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. We, my parents' best friend, her husband had terminal cancer, and they chose to end his life with the doctor's assistance, and that this was last year. And I can imagine how impactful it would have been for them to have someone else other than just the medical practitioner there to really help walk them through those final days. Because I know they spend a lot of time, like you said, getting affairs in order and all of that. But the emotional impact of knowing that it's coming and planning that, you know, having someone to walk them through through that process would have been really powerful. So I think I know if you choose to go into this work, Taryn, that you would have a major impact on people's lives for sure. And I hope you do go into that work, because it's exciting.
It is. And I'm hopeful too. But, you know, what I also have learned from my master's program is that we have to do the work first. And so I'm very aware that there's work I need to do. And so I need to go through this process. And I think the course will definitely help. And it was actually interesting at the beginning of this year, Alua and Catlin, so the two people I was talking about before, they ran this course called the Mortal Course, where they kind of explored all these topics around, you know, your body will die, and, you know, you can't take your stuff with you. And they kind of had a 9-week course that I took, and it was absolutely great to just kind of start this process and start thinking about it. And they had meditations, and they were just it was like just kind of like this conversation, you know, just picking something to talk about, you know, and go a little bit deeper into it. We'll see. I'm kind of excited about it, but, you know, we always have to take things one step at a time. And what I learned from my master's program is that if you're going to take someone through an exercise, take someone through an experience, you should have gone through it yourself, so you know how it feels. So I know I have to do my own work ahead of time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And go ahead.
That's the way you have, that's one of the ways you have empathy for people.
Yeah.
Even though the experience will never be exactly the same.
No.
You know, if you haven't experienced anything of the sort, then how can you have empathy for someone that's going through it? It's a rare person that could. So I love that.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to hold the space, but it's worth it. I'm very chatty, I know.
No, we love it. It's a podcast. We want you to be chatty.
Exactly.
Oh, good. So tell me a little bit about your work. You said that, you know, you said earlier that we've had some crossover. You know, tell me a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I hadn't known about you before, and that you hadn't known about me before, is that we both worked in domestic violence shelters here in Vancouver, as well as I worked the Vancouver Rape Relief and Crisis Center, which it's funny. It was also impacted by an experience when I was younger. My neighbor across the street, he was very abusive, and I used to see him right outside my bedroom window, abuse both his partner and his son. Oh. And so again, this is what really resonated with your story, is that really impacted me and drove me into that sort of work. More so as that volunteer work was a stepping stone into getting into the police service. So I was a police officer for a number of years. And when I left the police service to move to Canada, because it was not in Canada, I was working in what was called our serious crimes unit, dealing with victims of sexual assault. So it's definitely something that's been near and dear to my heart and the work that I've done in previous careers. And so it really, when you sent me your bio and the things that I didn't know about you, it really sparked that interest. So can you tell me? I know you said you worked in the domestic violence shelters for about 8 years.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, and how has that shaped what you do now?
I think it was so wonderful. In many, many ways, but it was a hard work. I did overnight shifts for a while, which, when any time you're doing an overnight shift at a shelter, it's either super boring or the whole place is burning down, right? There's no in between. It's 0 to 60 very fast. So that was very, you learn a lot about that aspect, and, then you have to deal with the impacts on your own body. And self-care, because I was also going to school like during that time for my Emily Carr. And I think back, and I don't even know how I did it, but I managed it somehow. But I think the most lessons came from when I was a part of a team and I was kind of the most senior person. And then we had a whole bunch of families come in with some pretty complex issues, PR applications that had to be done because partners withheld IDs, stuff like that. So really kind of on the ground system work. What do we need to do to get this person so they can, rent an apartment or get on income assistance? And it took months and months to resolve. And so it was kind of those day-to-day experiences, and then just supporting them through all that happens when a woman and sometimes their children come into the transition house. So I think it was great because the work that I did in Alberta, child welfare is not necessarily, you're not necessarily welcomed. You're coming in and saying there's some issues that we're concerned about with your children. And then there's always the worry for people the minute you say you're from child welfare that you're gonna take away their children. And that's huge. That's a huge part of the role. And Alberta was trying to make some strides to get away from that in terms of like trying to really engage people, but it's so hard. It's such a hard thing to do mandated social work. So I was really happy to take a step away from that and work with people who wanted the help, because they're coming into transition house in one way. They're saying, I need some help. And so if they stay for a day, they stay for like 2 months, you meet them where they're at. And I think that's the most important thing, that it's hard to sometimes to always come back. And as a social worker, as anyone in the field, you have to learn that professional distance and that self-care where you just meet them where they're at. You just deal with what's happening right now. You can do some future planning. That's also super important, but really a lot of the work is in the moment. Right now we need to do an income, income assistance application. Like that's what we need to do today.
Yeah.
And so you have to know the system as well. Yeah. Sure. I'm sure you did a lot of similar stuff at Rape Relief.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That was very much the initial calls coming in, right? And whether that be someone that just experienced a sexual assault and just needed someone to talk to walk them through the process, to attend court with them. We did a lot of that work, and I mean, it sounds like hand-holding, and yet sometimes that's what people need. Like if you're going through such a traumatic experience, sometimes you need someone there to hold your hand and to listen, like we talked about earlier. To really listen. So there was the practical sides of dealing with the system, and the I don't want to say counseling, because we weren't trained counselors per se. We were still volunteers, but the more of that emotional support side. And the same thing with the shelter, and even to getting donations. And clothing and housewares and cleaning and like you said, the day-to-day, which seems mundane. And if you can help a mother of 4 that's just, escaped abusive partner by
Yep.
cooking the lunch for her and her kids. Like,
Win.
seems small, but it is a big one, right?
Yeah.
To relieve some of that stress of day-to-day life. So.
And I'm glad that, you have the awareness of the when people have been traumatized, there is a bit of hand holding. I really, and I'm okay that we're saying that, but I wish we had a better way of talking about it, because it kind of has this negative connotation. But I get what you're saying, because I've done the same thing many, many times. Sometimes when people are traumatized, it's very natural for people to shut down for a while, and it's okay, and we need to normalize that in our society. Unfortunately, the freeze aspect of the fight flight freeze, it's very negatively looked on, but it's just your body just needs a little bit of time.
Our nervous system
a little
trying
bit
to
of
protect
time.
ourselves.
Exactly. But we're so hard on people, and so I think that a lot of sort of the hand holding work is giving people the time to help them reset their systems, because we have a system in place that's been around since the 60s or 70s, right? So we know how to move these women and these families through this system, and we do get to the point where sometimes we change our boundaries a little bit, but at first it really makes sense to me that we looked at it from a trauma perspective. Yeah.
We'll let Kristen talk now.
Yes, Kristen, please.
Oh, no, this is like, for me, this is all interesting too. A thought that came into my mind while we were talking about like the child protective services and those things, the fear that's around that. Here's a fun story that I actually learned of in my adult life. When I was a kid, I wasn't talking in my kindergarten class. And so they sent child protective services to my house to make sure everything was okay. Turns out I talked all the time at home. I just really didn't like talking to strangers, but that's something that wasn't really shared with me until I was an adult. Like, my mom sent me the transcript of it. And my imagining now as an adult is there was likely some fear for my parents with, like,
I'm sure
my daughter is not talking at school, and now we could get in trouble because somebody might think that she was abused, when I was happy at home. I really didn't like people. So being able to change the conversations around this too, and seeing it from a different way, and being able to look at it as like, we're helping you get on your feet rather than taking away your kids from you.
Yeah. And I think that the system is trying. And I think that they're succeeding to a certain extent, but there's this really dark history. And so that's hard to transcend, especially when we're talking about multi-generational trauma. And so, I mean, these are things that it's just going to take some time for us to sort out. But I'm so sorry that your mom had to go through that. That does kind of sound like it was hard for her, for sure.
Yeah.
I hope the worker was nice, because for the most part, we just are like, hey, is everything cool? But sometimes, if there's addiction or substance use and there's stuff happening as a result, like, there's hard conversations that happen and unfortunate outcomes. And I wish that it could change, and I don't have the answer. I don't. But again, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was a surprise for me to be like, oh, okay, well, sorry, Mom and Dad. Sorry for not talking. But
Yep. Yeah. My sister also had a speech issue for like 2 years or something when she was very young. And I never stopped talking when I was little. It happens, right?
So you, like, in order to get where you are today too, you've been taking like some small, bold actions. So what are some steps that you've taken to get you where you are today?
I think I just did a lot of I have been a bit relentless in some senses. I've just made it work. And I kind of, like, financially, it's been a bit of a hardship, doing your master's and your, late 30s, early 40s. That was a big, bold move to make. And I had a lot of support. So like, and I got a scholarship. So like all was a pretty good. But like, I was kind of relentless. It was like, well, you know, I this is what I want, and you know, it's not hurting anyone, and it's going to benefit me in the long run. And so this kind of go on my skill sets. You know, part of me really wanted to go get my Masters of Art, Masters of Fine Art, but I also knew where my heart was. And so I had to kind of keep coming back, you know, that social work is a part of who I am. And I also have to remember that, you know, I have this whole other life besides social work, like to develop myself, because it is hard to hear the stories, hold the space. And so I always have to like work on self-care. And sometimes I'm really good at it, and sometimes I have some more work to do.
Yeah, and one of the things you mentioned is your education at Emily Carr. And for those that listeners that aren't in Vancouver, and for Kristen, Emily Carr is a prestigious art school here in Vancouver. And I know pottery is a passion of yours, and you've made mention of working with pottery being a transformative experience. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, pottery is so amazing. So pottery is like, it's this wonderful medium where you take this big lump of clay, and I do a lot of wheel work, so the pottery wheel, the spinning wheel, and then I make it into things. And so I did some of that work. I had been introduced to pottery before, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I worked in a lot of did work at a lot of communities, but then kind of fell in love with this idea of going to get my Bachelor of Fine Arts, which I did at Emily Carr. And so they had a pretty good pottery studio there. And so I did a critical culture major, but any other studio course that I was allowed, I was trying to get some pottery work done. And then I realized how meditative and wonderful it was. And so there's something about being in front of that wheel, and, you know, you have music going or not, you're in the studio alone, and you're throwing a pot. There is just something so wonderful about it, and meditative. And I think that there's so much healing potential within it. And I'm not the first person to come up with that understanding. There's actually some studies in 2017 out of Hong Kong who did some comparisons of art therapy versus clay therapy. And there were some pretty cool outcomes that came out of that. And so I'm not the first person to realize that, but certainly it's like, probably I would say, not saved my life, but it's certainly, I didn't like who I was becoming in the child welfare world. I didn't want that. And so I feel like art saved me in that sense. That it kind of made, well, maybe that's not the only path to be a child welfare worker for 40 years. Maybe that's not really what you want to do. So it was a nice teacher in that way. But it also has taught me a lot about myself, and that, you know, when I can't throw, you know, there's something happening with my body that I need to regulate myself. I kind of had to learn all these interesting lessons around it. That was really cool. But I also have been teaching on and off the last couple of years, and that's a lot of fun, you know, because people are having the similar experience to me as pottery, right? And that it can be so wonderful. And the process itself is it is transformative, because you have this lump of clay, and then you turned out with this very hardened, beautiful piece of pottery that has glass on it, because that's what glaze is. And there's lots of processes within, and there's patience that you need to learn within. But then you also learn how to let things go. Like, sometimes pots explode in the kiln when they're being processed. And so you have to let things go, and, you know, be okay with it. And it really, for me, I had a lot of perfectionism issues, believe it or not. So that has helped me work on my perfectionist issues, for sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And, you know, what you're talking about is really about, you know, getting into that flow state. And I can imagine if you are too much in your head at the moment, like you said, that it doesn't work. That you have to get out of your head and get into that flow state in order to create what you want with the pottery that you're working with. So would you say that's your main source of self-care?
One of them for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think that I take a lot of naps. if I'm feeling tired, I just trust that my body is needing to do what it needs to do. And I also really enjoy nice long walks. Yeah. And I'm often always listening to an audiobook when I can, because I think it just slows me down a little bit, because I can move pretty fast sometimes. And so, but self-care is like a whole other whole other thing, isn't it?
Yeah. We're big on walks here.
Yes.
And
I know.
We have the saying that walking is integration. And so having that time unplugged where you can just walk alone if you can, especially in nature, or even just being outside, it really does help to integrate a lot of the things that you've been thinking about that have been running through your mind. So I love that you use both of those, or all of those things, tools for self-care.
Yeah. It's I think it's something that we talk a lot about in our 30s and 40s, but I don't remember it being so profound in my 20s. And so I don't know if it's a life cycle thing, or something that I didn't learn necessarily, but yeah. I look back now and go, yep, wish I knew that back then.
Yeah, definitely in my 20s was working multiple jobs and grind. That was the thing. And
totally.
Most of my 30s, to be honest.
Yeah. No, and I think that's another gift that the program gave me, is that, I had to reflect for 2 years on my emotional, physical, spiritual, and mental self. In every course, they asked for reflections on that through my entire master. So you kind of get used to monitoring, what am I doing to take care of these facets? It's a very, it was an Indigenous program, so they were basically basing it on the 4 directions.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It was. It was so beautiful. And I was so thankful that to be a part of that program at that time, because I was the second class that went through. So they were learning everything too. Yeah. And I think that the elders involved were so passionate. And that was really exciting to be a part of that, because then you began to realize, how can you begin to make changes? And then tackling such a big thing as spiritualism and social work. I mean, that's kind of a bold move in my mind.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's so grateful, beyond grateful to be a part of those experiences. And, the psychologist, Jane, she really wanted to work with the community, and she does. I even attended, for one of my practicums, I attended an intervention up north here in BC with a whole bunch of elders. And so that was pretty awesome.
It must be a powerful experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
cool. Well, where can our listeners go to find out more about you and potentially your services once you become a death doula?
Well, I haven't had my death doula stuff up yet, but my handle for Instagram for Pottery is T-Rock-Ceramics. So T_rock-ceramics. Maybe you can put it on somewhere in the written information. And I'm really hoping to do lessons once everyone's immunized, just because we're a small group and, people are a little bit, some of our folks are, a little bit older, so they're a little bit worried about health. And so we want to make sure everyone feels safe. But once things open up a little bit, we're very small. We have 2 wheels, but I'd be willing to have 2 people for like an 8 or 10 week go round. Awesome. And it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
And how would you recommend our listeners start their own pirate life by taking small, bold actions?
I think I would say to them, ask themselves what they really want, and that they always have choice. And it's hard when you're in the grind and you're doing things for survival, but try to stay open to the opportunities that are out there. and it's hard. And so, and I would also wish all your viewers to just take care of themselves, because this is hard times, and to be kind to yourself and kind to others.
Yeah, that's great advice, for sure. Last and most important question, Taryn, do you know any pirate jokes? And if you don't, we have some for you.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. Where can you find a pirate who lost his wooden leg?
Don't know.
Right where you left him.
Nice.
Yeah. On that note.
Is that the only one you got?
Yes, we are ending each podcast with one corny pirate joke.
I love it. It's a good place to end.
So thank you for your time, and
no problem.
For telling us about your experiences within and somewhat working outside of the social work kind of system. And you are a pirate within the Navy, if you would.
I love it.
Awesome. Thank you, Taryn.
Thank you. It was wonderful chatting with you guys.